Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thanks so much to the conference organizers. And I am pleased to talk to you about SEER Medicare data and how we can use this tremendous resource to understand the patterns and outcomes of care for elderly patients with cancer. So I think, as we've heard in the workshop, clinical trial data underrepresent patients over the age of 65 relative to the frequency at which cancer occurs in the over 65 population. And the reason is that clinical trials are trying to ask the question, can these drugs work? And what then happens is we roll them out to use in the context of routine practice. And the question there is very different. Do these drugs, new interventions, not just drugs, work in the population at large? And there we have a paucity of clinical trial data, and we have to rely on observational data. The SEER Medicare data is a tremendous observational data resource for evaluating cancer treatment in the over 65 population. So what is the SEER Medicare data? Well, it's a linkage between two resources. The first are the SEER Cancer Registry data. Every state in the United States has a cancer registry, but a select number of high-quality registries receive supplemental funding from the federal government, and they do really extensive, careful capture so that they have high-quality ascertainment and extraction of cancer data. Then there's Medicare. That's the second data source. Medicare is the primary insurer for 61.2 million Americans, 37.8 million of whom are enrolled in a fee-for-service plan, 23.4 in a managed care plan. For those patients in fee-for-service plans, every single item of medical care, so every drug, every scan, every hospitalization is itemized so we can actually track care. 86% of individuals who belong to Medicare are eligible because they're over age 65, and 14% are eligible because they are disabled. You can see from this map that there are many millions of people across all states who are enrolled in Medicare. So the SEER Medicare is a linkage of these two resources. From the SEER data, we get terrific detailed information about tumor type, histology, stage, grade, when the diagnosis was made, and what the initial course of treatment, typically radiation and surgery, included. And from Medicare, we get longitudinal follow-up, chemotherapy, physician visits, hospitalizations, pharmacy data, as well as things like home health. We can also estimate comorbidity scores from before a patient had cancer by looking at what kinds of claims they had for diagnoses made even before the cancer occurred. So who's in the linkage? Well, all cancer patients who reside in a SEER region who are enrolled in Medicare. There's also a 5% random sample of people who live in the same SEER areas but who are not diagnosed with cancer, so-called cancer-free controls. And this is nice because it lets you evaluate uptake and utilization of cancer screening tests, for example, chest CTs or colonoscopies. There's also linkage to census data at the census tract and zip code level that allows for ascertainment of social determinants of health, for example, patterns of care in more affluent and less affluent neighborhoods. So what about SEER Medicare data availability? Well, they exist for the entire time a registry has participated in the SEER program. The current data release just a couple of months ago includes cancer cases reported to the registries through 2017 with claims through 2018. And it's pretty straightforward to obtain these data from the NCI with an approved data users agreement and a modest fee. And the data can really be used for analyses that span the course of cancer control, from diagnosis all the way through end-of-life care. So this slide shows you an approximate number of cases included in the linkage on an annual basis. So nearly 25,000 breast cancer from just 1 year of data, nearly 15,000 colorectal cancers. So you can see that it's possible to assemble fairly large size cohorts. This slide just gives, from Dr. Enewald, who coordinates the SEER Medicare data at the NCI, just gives you a sense of the types of claims and data that are available based on the time period. So again, a very rich resource. So in the last couple of minutes, I just want to give you a couple of examples of how the data can be used to answer questions. Questions typically fall into two buckets: patterns of care questions and outcomes or effectiveness questions. So patterns of care questions. Well, we had a question which was, what percentage of stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer patients actually are getting genomic profiling within 60 days of a lung cancer diagnosis? And we were able to use the data to look for claims for genomic testing, and found that 25.9% of patients had molecular testing within 60 days. And we could also see that those who had such testing had superior survival. But more interesting typically are comparative effectiveness questions. Does treatment work? We had a question which was, what is the effectiveness of bevacizumab with chemotherapy compared to chemotherapy alone for patients with advanced non-small cell lung cancer? We did this after the FDA approval in 2006 of Avastin for lung cancer. This was an expensive drug with some significant side effects, including hypertension, bleeding, and a trial had been published in the New England Journal of Medicine by Dr. Sandler that underrepresented patients under the age of 65. That trial suggested that bevacizumab added to chemotherapy was effective. The hazard ratio was 0.79, but a subgroup analysis of patients under 65 crossed one, suggesting that maybe in that group it was not effective. So we asked the question using SEER Medicare data, are the benefits of bevacizumab worth it for people over the age of 65? So we constructed from SEER Medicare data two groups of patients. We defined them based on SEER records, based on their Medicare enrollment records. And the first thing we did was create the patterns of care and create the so-called treatment pie. And we found that the dominant chemotherapy given to these patients, which is shown by the blue slice, was carboplatin paclitaxel, although there were many other variants, as you can see from all the other little slices. We went to the data, we rigorously defined a cohort with careful inclusion criteria, and we identified several groups of patients, those who had carbotaxol alone and those who had carbotaxol with bevacizumab. We matched patients using propensity scores based on their pre-existing comorbidity. And again, this is a careful and important step in use of observational data. Otherwise, you can end up with all kinds of biases, because we saw, of course, that patients with high levels of comorbidity were less likely to receive bevacizumab, and propensity score matching mitigates these kinds of biases. But again, one of the challenges with SEER Medicare data is that you can only match on attributes you can measure. And again, key point, observational data are not randomized trial data. So here are the results that we found when we compared. So for median survival for patients who got carbotaxol alone was 8.9 months. And when bevacizumab was added, it was less than a 1 month difference at 9.7 months. And you can see the subgroups in patients over the age of 75. Really, our conclusion was that adding bevacizumab to carboplatin paclitaxel was not associated with a statistically significant improvement in survival for patients age 65 or older. A key point using SEER Medicare data, it's observational research, and application of careful methods can minimize bias, but they don't eliminate it. Another limitation is that there is a several-year lag in data availability. The reasons treatments aren't administered can't be determined, and test results can't be obtained. So, summary thoughts about using SEER Medicare to assess cancer care in geriatric populations. They're a critically important resource that characterizes care, and because most people over the age of 65 in the United States are insured by Medicare, it's an almost population-based and representative data source. It's outstanding for measuring patterns of care. It's excellent for measuring quality of care. It's a good resource for measuring effectiveness of care, but you have to watch out for all the biases. It's extremely useful for generating hypotheses and prioritizing studies that rely on more detailed data sources, such as EHR data or data obtained directly from patients. NCI has worked tremendously hard on enhancements and the timeliness of data. And I would just conclude by saying that investment in our tumor registries and modernizing them with molecular and treatment data will be a priority so that we can understand patterns and outcomes of care going forward. Thank you so much. More details on the SEER Medicare data can be obtained here. This is the linkage, and I encourage you to visit it. It is a treasure trove of valuable information. Thank you.